application was successfully saved, the system will go through and periodically save your information. And now it is heading into dependency determination. This is where the system is trying to determine, is your student going to be filing as a dependent student or an independent student? Dependent student means that it is going to require the parent's financial information as well as the student's financial information. Independent student requires only the student's information. So as we work down through here, these are a set of very hard and fast questions. There really isn't a way necessarily to get around these to quote-unquote game the system. I do not recommend that you try and do that at all. Just answer these questions honestly, and you can work, and it will work its way out. And I'll tell you about an appeals process later on that can help you with this. So to determine the student's dependency, do you have children who will receive more than half their support from you between July 1st, 2011 and June 30th, 2012? Thankfully, that is a rarity, so we're going to answer no to that question. Do you have dependents other than your children or spouse who live with you and who receive more than half their support from you? This is most likely for most traditional students. That's going to be no as well. Number of family members in the 2011-2012 household. Now, this is going to be everybody in the student's household. Mom, dad, brothers and sisters, grandma if she's living with you and you're helping to support her. So in this instance, we're going to say 5. How many people in your household will be in college in 2011-2012? In this instance, let's say 1. You are considered an independent student. Independent student. Oh, that's interesting. How did this happen? I must have missed something somewhere. I know what it was. So I want to go back and I want to get this information straight. I put a birth date in. That was too early. That should have been 93, not 83. Because it was automatically looking at that birth date and saying, oh, wow, this student is about almost 30 years old. They must be an independent student. So now let's go back to dependency status. Okay, here we go. Fine. That would have been a little bit confusing. So now we're back to dependency determination. Were you born before January 1st, 1988? That is the age cutoff for dependency status for 2011. The answer is no. As of today, are you married? No. At the beginning of 2011 school year, will you be working on a master's or doctorate program? No. Do you have children who will receive more than half their support between July 1st, 2011 and 2012? No. Do you have any dependents? No. Are you currently serving in active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces? No. Are you a veteran in the U.S. Armed Forces? Well, not for an 18-year-old. That would be unusual. At any time since you turned 13, were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care or were you dependent ward of the court? Now, this is some of the new questions that were added here in the last couple of years. The previous ones were the standards that have been going for years and years and years. We're going to answer no to this question as well. Were you determined by a court or state legal residence? Are you or were you an emancipated minor? That will be no. Determined by a court or state of legal residence, were you a legal guardianship? Now, this question is probably going to be the most common of the new questions that might be answered yes. For example, I have a client of mine that she is being raised by her aunt, and her aunt is her legal guardian. In that case, she would answer yes to this. And if she did answer yes, boom, she's an independent student. And then it's going to ask the questions about the student's family size. But in this instance, we'll say no again. Then on or after July 1st, were you homeless or were you at risk of being homeless? We'll answer no here. Also, this right here, this can be determined by a court, or it can be determined by a social worker, or it can be determined by your guidance counselor at high school. Many of these dependency questions are going to be there. You may be challenged on these by the colleges and universities, and they will be looking for documentation to back up what you're answering on these dependency questions. Because frankly, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, people will try to game these dependency questions, and it does not work out well for them. So in this instance, the student turns out to be a dependent student. This means you must provide parental information. You will provide the parental information, or in some very unusual cases, I am unable to provide parental information. If that is checked, you will be challenged on it by the colleges and universities, and you will have to provide some form of documentation, affidavits, legal statements, describing why that information cannot be reported. Do not recommend that you try and falsify anything here. It can really come back to bite you. Click on Next. It's going to ask, now you're getting in to notice the change here in information. Parent information shows up on the side. The color changes. So we add here, what is your parent's marital status of today? We'll say married or remarried. You can also have single, divorced, separated, or widowed. Single, divorced, or separated, or widowed will all be treated in the same fashion for FAFSA purposes. They're simply asking for three different answers here for demographic purposes. But in this instance, we will say married or remarried. Also, something else to keep in mind, if you are remarried, you need to include the financial information for your new spouse as well. Just because the spouse isn't the natural father of your children, that is still counted as financial information for your household. Also, if you are divorced or separated, you only use the financial information for the parent that the student lives with the most. You do not have to include both natural parents' financial information. So we'll see married or remarried. When did your parents get married or remarried? We're going to say January of 1985. Whoops. All they're looking for here is month and year. Social Security number for your stepfather. We'll just make something up. 1985 6743 2. What is your stepfather's last name? Well, lo and behold, his father's last name. His name is Smith as well. First initial, Bob. Date of birth, he happened to be born on January 1st as well. I tell you, this is really a remarkable family here. And that was in about 1967. Mother's Social Security number, we'll pop that in there. I'm just making these numbers up. There's no real pattern to these. Her last name is Smith. Her first initial, her name happens to be Betty. And would you believe it? She was born on January 1st. I tell you, this has got to be the most unusual family that's ever filled out this form. Parents' email address. Now, again, you want this to be a permanent email address that you can add in here. You don't have to put your parents' email address in this field. You can leave this field blank. I do not recommend that, however. You want to have some kind of an email address in here that that will be something permanent, long-term. So we're just going to put in Bob, BZ Bob, why not, at gmail.com. And I'll just copy that. Have your parents lived in Iowa for at least 5 years? Yes. Again, that can have some bearing on state funds that you might want to qualify for. Household size, 5 people in the household, 1 student that's actually going to be in college. You're always going to have how many in the household will be college students. You'll always be answering at least 1. Also, when you're talking about the number of students that are going to be in college, this does not include parents. It only includes the siblings. It used to be that parents would be included in the equation. They're not any longer. However, that does give you some leverage for an appeal later on, but they don't necessarily include that in the FAFSA equation up front. Next. Parent tax information, again, We're going to say that the parent will file. You can, and if you've already completed your FAFSA, your income taxes by now, you can have already completed down there. Will file, not going to file. For parents, not going to file is pretty unusual. Will file, if you haven't done your taxes yet, you can file, assuming that you are going to process those taxes later. Now, something else to keep in mind when you're looking at this is that you don't have to submit your taxes early. You could be sitting with your taxes completed today and a signed copy ready to go in the mail, and you can pick already completed. If you owe money on your taxes, you don't want to send that in before April 15th. That's fine. You can just hang on to that until April 15th with no problem. But what they're looking for on the already completed is, have you already run all your calculations and have the accurate numbers that you're going to be putting in the subsequent form? Or are you on will file, where are you going to be making estimates for the information that you're going to be putting on these subsequent questions? Then we get into all of the financial information here. What type of income tax return will your parents file in 2010? In this example, 1040. Already explained the difference between the 1040, 1040A, and the 1040EZ. What was your parents' adjusted gross income for 2010? This example would say $75,000. How much did your father or stepfather earn in working wages? We'll say dad earned $50,000 and mom earned $25,000. Now, in most cases, you're not going to have as clean-cut numbers of these, obviously, on your tax returns. Is either a dislocated worker. Dislocated worker, effectively, in most instances, it's going to be laid off or unemployed in some fashion. Or if you are self-employed, economy went south, your business has gone to the dogs, and you're out of work and you're self-employed as well. But in this instance, we're going to say no, neither of them is a dislocated worker. If you answer yes to dislocated worker, it can add some opportunities for the student's financial aid later on.